Okay, welcome to a special weekend edition of Brighteon Broadcast News. There's so much breaking news. I had to record another edition. This is for Sunday, November 12th, 2023. Mike Adams here. Thank you for joining me. First thing that everybody needs to know is that there's about to be a major volcanic eruption in Iceland. And there have been, over 1,000 earthquakes over the last 24 hours or so, at least as of the time I'm recording this. It says 1,485 earthquakes. It says 48 hours. Some deformation of the land has reached 120 centimeters. So, about 4 feet, let's say. So certain areas of land are rising 4 feet, and that level of deformation indicates crazy things happening beneath the land. And some of you listening are probably geologists, and I'm simplifying this, but clearly there's going to be an eruption. And here's a quote from Thorvaldur Thordarson. Sorry, I have trouble with all the Icelandic names, but he's a professor of volcanology at the University of Iceland. He told state broadcaster RUV, quote, "I don't think it's long before an eruption, hours or a few days." And in the UK, the government has issued warnings that it is, quote, increasingly possible that a volcanic eruption could occur. 3,000 residents have been evacuated so far. Now, it's possible that this could be no big deal. It's possible. There are volcanoes from time to time that erupt, and they don't destroy the global food supply or anything like that. However, the land deformation that has been detected so far is, according to the Icelandic Met Office, quote, much higher than has been previously measured on the Reykjanes Peninsula. Says the likelihood of a volcanic eruption occurring in the near future is deemed considerable. So the level of land deformation is highly unusual, and what that generally indicates, though, again, volcanologists would laugh at the simplification of this. But what it generally indicates is that there's a lot more pressure underground that has to be released, which is what a volcanic eruption consists of. So in order to deform large pieces of land by 120 centimeters, it means that something is pushing with a very, very powerful force underneath the ground. And I don't know if you recall the eruption of Mount St. Helens in the United States, along the Pacific Northwest area. Mount St. Helens had a major deformation on the side of the mountain before it blew, catastrophically erupted and killed some people. But there were environmental effects of that, which we all need to understand. And this is what I'm trying to get to. If this volcano is much larger than what people have anticipated, then this could cause disruption of the global food supply for 1 to 2 years. And that's because of the ejection of particulate matter into the atmosphere that can, of course, block the sun. And so there was famously, in 1815, there was the eruption of what was called Mount Tambora, which is located in what we now call Indonesia. It wasn't called Indonesia at the time. But after that eruption, it caused across Europe what was named the year without a summer. And even the Smithsonian magazine writes about this. You can look it up online, that about 90,000 people died in the local area around that volcano due to starvation. That's because crops died and forests died and sources of fresh water were, of course, contaminated. But here we are in 2023, and we now have a very fragile global food supply chain. And we can see it, we can experience it because, of course, we're in the food business, and you can see it at the grocery store. You can see prices continue to rise, and sometimes you have shortages or a lack of options on different food items. And if we get hit with a significant volcano at this point that causes more global dimming, then it will cool, for sure, the northern hemisphere. And the cooling may be very slight. But even slight cooling can shorten crop seasons and can strongly impact crop yields, especially in, well, Europe. Because Europe, being of its northern latitude, it doesn't have long growing seasons anyway. And if you shorten growing seasons there, even by something like just 2 to 4 weeks, it can have a significant impact on crop yields, which will, of course, impact the global supply chain. So what we need to be doing right now, all of us, you and I, we need to watch for this volcanic eruption, and we need to try to get a sense of how much particulate matter is being ejected. In fact, I'm going to invite David Dubine on the minute this thing blows. I'm going to call Dubine, get him on, from Adapt 2030. And see what he has to say about this. But we need to know how much particulate matter is ejected, also how high into the atmosphere it is ejected, because the higher it goes, the longer it stays suspended in the atmosphere. And the height of the ejection depends on, of course, the force with which the matter is ejected. And that's why the deformation of the land right now is a strong indicator of a tremendous amount of force. If that force is focused in a relatively small opening, where the eruption actually breaks through, then that force can eject material into even the stratosphere. And there it will hover around for, 2 years or so, and that can cause global cooling, and that can contribute to crop failures. And that is cumulative on top of the fact that we are entering a grand solar minimum cycle that is also reducing the amount of solar radiation that is reaching the surface of the Earth. Now, if you missed it, I recently interviewed Professor Valentina Zarkova. She is a native Ukrainian scientist. And if you want to look up her name and find this interview, it's on my channel, HR Report, on Brighteon.com. But the easiest way is just search for Professor Valentina, Valentina. It's spelled like Valentine, but it ends with an A instead of an E. So Professor Valentina. And the title of that is Why Solar Cycles Will Lead to Global Famine for 2+ decades to come. And in that interview, in fact, I don't know, maybe I should play a little snippet here, I'm not sure. But in that interview, she talks about how the grand solar minimum, which has already begun, well, first of all, let me back up. She and her team have deconvoluted the multiple cyclic oscillations of solar magnetism, the underlying magnetic fields, and how they behave underneath the surface of the sun in particular, and how that affects solar radiation reaching planet Earth. And it turns out there are multiple cycles that have different periods. So the period of a cycle is how long the cycle takes to repeat itself. And there are some cycles that she talks about that are, let's say, a decade, and others that are 11 years, and others that are shorter, and others that are longer. But right now, all of those cycles are coalescing into a sun radiation minimum, or a dip in the amount of solar radiation that's going to reach the Earth. And this dip, I think she said, gets very bad through the 2030s. And then by early 2040s, we start to come out of that. I'm going from memory. You can watch the interview for the exact years. But we're entering that cycle now. We're kind of on the downward slope, but we haven't yet hit the bottom trough. That happens, I think, what did she say, 2035 or 2032, something like that. But we're sliding down in terms of solar radiation. And that means we're going to start experiencing food crop failures more and more, and global famine, especially in European countries, like I said before, that don't get a lot of solar radiation anyway. If you add a major volcanic eruption to that, then you get double the dose of, well, double the dose of dimming, I guess would be the way to say that. And without solar radiation, of course, photosynthesis can't function. And then you get crop failures and you get global famine and starvation. So watch that interview if you haven't seen it yet. It's absolutely worth watching. And then keep your eyes on this volcanic eruption that is about to occur, according to, well, essentially, mainstream volcanologists. And you can't deny that something big is about to happen when you look at the ground deformations and the nearly 1,500 earthquakes. So from The Independent in the UK, it says, quote, Iceland evacuates town and raises aviation alert as concerns rise that a volcano may erupt. Most tremors have been felt in the Reykjanes Peninsula, maybe that's the way to pronounce that, in the southwest of the country, where small earthquakes have been felt every day for more than 2 weeks due to a buildup of volcanic magma 3 miles underground. So volcanic magma 3 miles underground is pushing the surface up by, in some places, 120 centimeters. That is a lot. I mean, 3 miles underground? You know how much the Earth weighs? I mean, not the whole planet. I mean, how much a column of soil and rock, how much that weighs if it's 3 miles deep? I mean, we're talking about insane amounts of pressure, and yet the magma underneath is so strong that it's pushing all of that up. It's lifting the land. It's lifting like a 3 mile thick chunk of land, pushing it up. That's how much pressure. So when this magma finds an outlet to the surface, kaboom. So from the story, thousands have been told to evacuate the town of Grindavik as a precautionary measure as a magma tunnel stretches below the surface. Yeah. You thought we were only going to hear about Hamas tunnels, but no, magma tunnels are even more dangerous than Hamas tunnels, it turns out, because magma tunnels can destroy entire cities, if they blow up in the wrong place. Residents of a fishing town in southwestern Iceland have left their homes after increasing concern about a potential volcanic eruption caused civil defense authorities to declare a state of emergency in the region. So there you go. All right. So just keep your eyes on this. And again, even if you don't live in Iceland or you don't even live in Europe, this can affect all of us globally because of the impacts on the food supply chain. All right, now we have another major breaking story. Actually, well, a couple of them, but the big one involves Ukraine today. We'll get to that in just a second because, well, the CIA's newspaper, the Washington Post, is now blaming the destruction of the Nordstream pipelines on a top Ukrainian military commander. We'll get to that. But first, guess what? Israel is now threatening Lebanon. Well, they're threatening Hezbollah, which is based in southern Lebanon. But check this out. The defense minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, who is a, full-blown Zionist. He's like, kill them all, bomb the women. I mean, the dude's out of his mind, insane. He is now saying, quote, what we are doing in Gaza, we know how to do in Beirut. What? What? He's threatening to bomb Beirut into rubble. What did Beirut do to Israel? I mean, recently, I know that Israel was at war with Lebanon. I think in 2006, Israel tried to basically go in and invade and take more land from Lebanon. And Hezbollah fought back and actually defeated the IDF at that time and kicked them out and has blocked them ever since. And so there's been a lot of animosity between these two nations. Well, Gallant, he said, I guess he's getting intel that Hezbollah is about to move on Israel, which I'm a little bit skeptical of that. But he said that Hezbollah leadership is, quote, close to making a grave mistake. And this was reported in the Times of Israel, by the way, which is a pro-Israel publication. He went on to say, Hezbollah is dragging Lebanon into a war that may happen, and it is making mistakes. If it makes mistakes of this kind, the ones who will pay the price are, first of all, the citizens of Lebanon. What we're doing in Gaza, we know how to do in Beirut. Now, this is astonishing to me because he basically just said Israel will bomb civilians in Lebanon. He just said it. He said the ones who will pay the price are, first of all, the citizens of Lebanon. He did not say Hezbollah, military fighters, or any military forces at all. He said the citizens of Lebanon are going to pay the price. This is practically an admission that Israel is bombing the Palestinian civilians, which of course they are. I mean, that's become rather obvious over the last, nearly 35 days. But to now say, oh, we're going to do it to Beirut too. I mean, how do you justify that? You know, the justification of what Israel is doing right now to Gaza, at least from the point of view of Israel, is, Hamas attacked us on October 7th, and thus we have to bomb all their people into rubble. Well, how do you make that argument about Beirut? There was no, terrorism attack, civilians killed. Beirut or Hezbollah didn't come in and, kidnap 200 civilians and take them as prisoner. So how are you going to justify this? This is an astonishing escalation. And it makes me wonder whether Hezbollah is actually getting very close to taking action, to moving against Israel, obviously from the north of Israel or southern Lebanon. Make sure that you understand the maps here. Geography is everything in this, especially in this, but make sure you understand the maps. Make sure you know where Egypt is. Make sure you know where Israel is, where the Suez Canal is, the shape of the Mediterranean Sea. You need to know where Turkey is. You need to know where Lebanon is and Beirut and port access. You need to know where the Red Sea is. You need to understand where Yemen is and Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Syria and all of it. Because if you don't understand the geography, you won't understand the situation. And even then, it's still crazy difficult to understand the situation. I don't claim to be, the expert on this by any means. There are way better experts out there, obviously, who know more about the situation than do I. But just from looking at OSINT, or open source intelligence, we can now conclude that Israel is nervous that Hezbollah may attack. Okay? Oh, and by the way, I interviewed Scott Ritter last week about Ukraine, Russia, Israel, and Hamas. And I haven't yet played that interview in this podcast, so I'm going to play it here today. So Scott Ritter, of course, former UN weapons inspector, and he's got some very critical things to say about Israel. I asked him, I think, some skeptical questions, by the way, trying to pry a little bit into his thinking and his analysis. But I think he gave a very compelling, or at least an intriguing account of the geopolitical situation in the Middle East, as well as in, Ukraine and Russia. So I'm going to play that interview. It's maybe 40 minutes, something like that, maybe 45 at the most. But I will include that here today. Now, Iran's foreign minister, and I'm going to try to get his name. I need to memorize this guy's name because he seems to say something every day. It's Hossein Amir Abdollahian. Perhaps that's a way to say it. Abdollahian. I don't know. He predicted earlier this week that a wider escalation of the conflict appears to be inevitable. So, and Iran's foreign minister has been talking pretty tough here. Now, Iran is known to fund Hezbollah. So there is a direct link. So in other words, if Iran's foreign minister is saying, Hezbollah is going to get active in this war, there is reason to believe that Iran's foreign minister, knows what he's talking about. Now, if you recall, more than a week ago, on like the Friday before last Friday, the Hezbollah leader, Nasrallah, Syed Hassan Nasrallah, he said he did not declare war, as many people thought he might, but he said there had been, quote, an upgrade in the operations against Israel. He said, quote, there has been a quantitative improvement in the number of operations, the size and number of targets, as well as an increase in the type of weapons. That's from Nasrallah. Now, there's a bigger context in all of this. There always is in the Middle East. But one thing you need to understand is that Lebanon is facing a currency collapse right now. Lebanon's currency has plummeted in value. I don't know what the official inflation rate is, but it's something like 60% a year. So if you thought inflation was bad in the U.S., try buying groceries in Beirut sometime, right? The situation is very fragile in Lebanon. And Lebanon is a country made up of many different factions, many different tribes and religious groups, and they're always warring with each other, even inside Lebanon. And so Lebanon's government has never been stable. It's always been these internal factions fighting with each other for control over the system. And right now, Lebanon as a nation cannot afford to go to war with Israel. Lebanon can't afford for Beirut, in other words, to be bombed like Gaza. And probably Gallant of Israel, the defense minister, he probably knows that he can make the Lebanese government rather fearful of the economic consequences of an Israeli bombing of Beirut. And by the way, in the years past, I don't recall which years exactly, but Israel has bombed certain neighborhoods inside Lebanon into rubble. And so it's very clear that when Gallant makes this threat that there's a history of Israel doing that, like what they're doing to Gaza today, but also Israel does have the capability to carry out that threat. So I'm just guessing, but there is likely pressure from the government of Lebanon to try to rein in Hezbollah and say, hey, don't go full force attacking Israel, because we, the Lebanese people, we are going to pay the price if you do that. And this is what Gallant is actually seizing upon, to say, quote, the ones who will pay the price are first of all the citizens of Lebanon. In other words, Gallant is saying that they will bomb the hospitals, they will bomb the schools, they will bomb the universities, they will bomb residential buildings in Lebanon. So the dynamics here are, of course, quite complicated, but do not forget that Hezbollah has at least 100,000 rockets. And actually, what I've heard from various experts and analysts in this area, including Colonel Douglas McGregor, who I interviewed recently, you can find that on my channel, but also Scott Ritter and others, is that Hezbollah has anywhere from 100,000 rockets to over 200,000. And I've heard that half of them are precision guided. I guess you would have to call them missiles in that case, but the other half are unguided, dumb rockets, you would say. So I don't know the actual number that they have, but it's a lot, and they can do a lot of damage. Now, the next major news item, this is huge news. Now, the next major news item, and this is huge news, and by the way, there's also a breaking story that Russia and other BRICS nations, in addition to creating their own currency, they're being pushed to create their own internet, to not use the root domain system that the West uses, but to literally create their own internet with their own protocols and so on. Because the West controls the content on the current internet. So in addition to having a competitor to the dollar, a new BRICS currency, there could be a competitor to the entire internet of the West. That's something, we'll talk about that more next week. But the big news here is that the Washington Post, which of course is the news rag of the CIA, the Washington Post has come out citing, quote, Ukrainian sources and European officials and whatever, quote, people knowledgeable about the details of the covert operation. That's all they give us. They say that Roman Chervinsky, a colonel in the Ukrainian military was responsible for managing the logistics and support for a 6-person sabotage team that destroyed the Nordstream pipeline. So, and they say that he had deep ties with Ukrainian intelligence and the military, and he served with a special operations forces unit that coordinated the sabotage on the territories controlled by Russian forces. So we're talking about various sabotage operations that have taken place. Now, Chervinsky, it's critical to understand the names here and what's going on. Now, Chervinsky reports to Major General Viktor Hanushchak, who, the story says, communicated directly with Ukraine's top military commander, General Valery Zaluzhny. So what they're doing in this story, now, make no mistake, this story is the CIA. And I'll tell you what they're doing here, at least in my view. This story says Chervinsky blew up Nord Stream, not the United States Navy, even though we already know it was the United States Navy. But they're trying to blame Chervinsky, and then they're trying to tie Chervinsky to Zaluzhny. Now, Zaluzhny, this is also critical to understand. Zaluzhny is an opponent internally with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. And Zelensky is delusional. This has come out recently in Newsweek articles, and The Economist also, which published an interview with Zaluzhny. Zaluzhny is trying to be set up as the fall guy by Zelensky and the CIA, because Zaluzhny is actually well positioned to be the replacement president when Zelensky is removed from power, or there may be a military coup against Zelensky, and that military coup could involve potentially Zaluzhny. Now, I do want to put an asterisk over all of this. This is my analysis as an American. There are other people closer to this who have a lot more detail, and they may have a much more refined view of this. And of course, I don't speak or read Ukrainian, so I don't have any way of knowing what the local news says. But as an American, looking at the Washington Post, looking at the recent actions by Zelensky, who is begging for money from the West, like literally doing interviews saying, if you give me money, I'll pay it back. I mean, I guess giving him $110 billion with no strings attached, that wasn't enough. Now it's like, we need even more money, but this time we'll pay you back. Give me a break. Well, Ukraine is about to be cut off from all this free money from the United States. So that's about to happen. And that's why the media has been ordered, such as Newsweek, to start making Zelensky look like a lunatic, like a delusional lunatic. Like nobody believes that Ukraine can win other than Zelensky. And Ukraine has sadly gone through so many men, hundreds of thousands of lives lost. They've burned through so much equipment. They've lost, tanks and artillery pieces and HIMARS, and they've burned through all these munitions. And Ukraine has not made the progress that they were supposed to have made. And as a result, the United States is about to cut ties with Ukraine. Look, listen carefully. The U.S. is about to abandon Ukraine and shift to the Middle East. This is what you're witnessing here. And in order to abandon Ukraine, they need a scapegoat. And the scapegoats are being set up here to be Chervinsky for destroying Nord Stream, which was a civilian infrastructure target, and the destruction of that caused devastating economic consequences to Germany and all of Western Europe. It shut down industry. It caused a job loss and inflation and loss of fertilizer and a loss of industry, especially in Germany. Even the moving out of the BASF corporation that we talked about because they don't have a ready supply of natural gas. So Chervinsky is being blamed. There's an effort to try to tie Chervinsky to Zaluzhny, but also there's an effort by the West to blame Zelensky for the whole thing. And then when the situation collapses, which is about to happen, the whole situation there, it's just about over. when it collapses, the West needs to blame somebody other than the Pentagon. You know, NATO can't blame NATO. NATO needs to blame somebody else, probably somebody whose name starts with Z. It's either Zelensky or Zelensky, or maybe both, and maybe with a side of Chervinsky. That's what's going to happen here. You can see the narrative being rolled out. They're rolling it out every single day. I mean, this piece in the Washington Post is exactly this narrative. Now, Chervinsky replied to the Washington Post and said, quote, "All speculations about my involvement in the attack on Nordstream are being spread by Russian propaganda without any basis." Now, that's funny because it's actually American propaganda, but he can't say anything against America. So he's saying it's Russian propaganda. No, the Washington Post is not Russian propaganda. The Washington Post is CIA propaganda. But you have to know all of this in order to be able to process what's actually being stated. Now, Chervinsky is in prison, as I understand it. He was arrested earlier this year, and he was charged with abusing his power. I think, spying or intelligence surveillance operations against other Ukrainians, military people, because everybody's spying on each other. So he's in jail, and it's pretty convenient to blame him for everything since he can't flee the country. He can't hire investigators to prove his innocence or anything. Maybe he's not innocent, but he's clearly being set up as one of the scapegoats. So now the narrative that we're being told is a ridiculous narrative. We are told that the Nord Stream pipelines 1 and 2 were blown up by a few guys on a yacht, just like fishermen on a yacht or something, using a fake passport. This yacht is called the Andromeda. And then they just got explosives, and somehow then they had this advanced diving operation off this yacht, and they planted the explosives on the pipelines. And that's no small feat. That's actually a U.S. Navy SEAL diving demolition expert type of operation, by the way. Anyway, we're told some guys on a yacht blew this thing up, and isn't that convenient? And now we're told that the yacht was in Ukraine, and then none of the Western countries will dare point the finger at the United States Navy, even though the U.S. Navy was there running an operation called Balt Ops, Baltic Sea operations. It was a training exercise. What were they training? Underwater demolition, mine clearing, and explosive removal training. What a convenient cover story. So they were there months earlier in the Balt Ops operation. I think that was Balt Ops. I think it was Balt Ops 21 for 2021. I think that's when they were there. And then a few months later, the explosives were remotely detonated. And that way, the U.S. Navy wasn't anywhere nearby when it happened. And then they could blame whoever the CIA wanted to blame. And you notice they haven't issued the blame until now. So consider the timing of this announcement. Why now? Why all of a sudden is it Chervinsky? Why all of a sudden are we being told that, now we know who the culprits were? Now, at this time when Ukraine is clearly losing the war and the United States needs to pivot in order to protect the Biden administration from U.S. voters, because Biden doesn't want to have a loss on his record, so they're pivoting away from Ukraine. Don't remember anything about Ukraine. Let's talk about instead Hamas. Let's talk about Israel. Let's talk about Iran. Let's talk about the Middle East. But don't remember anything. It's like a hypnosis, like they're waving a watch. Do, 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 do. You're feeling sleepy. Do, do, do. Nothing happened in Ukraine. Do, 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 do. Like, that's what they're doing now. It's a total psychological operation being carried out by the West. And you probably, you are well aware of this. I mean, any informed person is well aware of it. Now, why was Nord Stream blown up in the first place? Well, there's all this video footage from before it was ever blown up, of Victoria Nuland and other officials saying, basically, we're absolutely going to destroy it. We are going to destroy Nord Stream. Why? Because they wanted all of Europe dependent on U.S. LNG exports, liquid natural gas. LNG is about 3 or 4 times the price of natural gas from Russia. In particular, it's Gazprom Corporation that was exporting the gas through Nordstream to Germany and other European countries. So Europe was getting cheap, affordable energy, and Russia had leverage over Europe because it supplied the gas. So the United States comes in, the U.S. empire in bully mode, which is the only mode in which the U.S. operates now, and says, oh, well, we'd rather you buy natural gas from us. Actually, from our billionaire donors who donate to the Democrat Party, actually, is what that is, the big, rich, powerful corporations. And so, well, we need to blow up Nordstream. And so they did. All of a sudden, Europe is plunged into an energy famine. All of a sudden, exports of LNG out of the United States start spiking up, and billions of dollars are earned from that, you see. So somebody got paid off in the U.S. Navy to blow up Nordstream, and somebody got paid off in the State Department. Somebody got paid off in the Biden administration. Probably a lot of people got paid off. This was probably a multi-billion-dollar payola operation. And then the U.S. natural gas exporters got exactly what they wanted. They got Europe to buy their LNG. And by the way, guess who else exports liquid natural gas? Middle Eastern countries. And guess where a big chunk of that gas travels through on ships? Oh, the Strait of Hormuz, right next to Iran. So guess what the next plan is from the United States? Oh, bomb Iran. Block the Strait of Hormuz. Wouldn't that be convenient for U.S. LNG exporters, who, again, are tied to some of the wealthiest corporations, wealthiest families in America, that pay out billions of dollars in bribes and payola and kickbacks to all the right people in all the right departments and government offices? If you can start a war with Iran and you can get an energy embargo out of the Middle East, then Europe will have to buy LNG from the United States at probably 6 times the price. And this is the model of what the United States does. This is the corporate war model. I mean, the corporations need the war, so including the weapons manufacturers, like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and whatever, they need war too. So everybody in the Pentagon, State Department, Biden administration, they're all paid off to start more wars, blow bleep up. I'll try not to use profanity, but blow stuff up, start more wars, destroy infrastructure in Europe, destroy the Gazprom, Nordstream pipelines, destroy, if they can, export ports in the Middle East, probably bomb Iran, get oil embargoes and LNG embargoes in place, and then the U.S. companies will make record profits, and it's all a money-making operation, and weapons manufacturers will make profits. And by doing this, the U.S. will economically devastate Europe. I mean, you've heard the accusation that war is a racket. Well, here you go. Here you go. But of course, when the U.S. is destroying Nord Stream and destroying energy infrastructure affecting Europe or devastating Europe, they need a scapegoat. And the U.S. administration now needs to cut ties with Ukraine. So this story that a Ukrainian military official destroyed Nord Stream, hey, it's 2 birds with 1 stone. One narrative allows the U.S. to pivot away from Ukraine. Oh my gosh, we can't support those people. They blew up infrastructure that's affecting Europe. And to make Chervinsky, possibly Zelensky, and possibly Zelensky the scapegoats in order to call for regime change. So over the next couple of months, you're going to see stories coming out in the New York Times and the Washington Post that say, essentially, I mean, look, this is not a difficult prediction to make. The stories are going to say, oh my God, these Ukrainian leaders turn out to be a bunch of crooks, as if we didn't know that the whole time. They're a bunch of crooks, and they've taken a bunch of money. The money's gone. We don't even know where it went. Billions are missing. these crooks, they betrayed us. They stiffed us. And we need new leaders in Ukraine, and there's going to be a big push by the CIA for regime change. And then they're going to bring in some new people, and Victoria Nuland is going to be sobbing a bucket load of tears somewhere. Our plan didn't work. And they're going to bring in a new leader, a leader that can negotiate with Putin for a settlement of the Ukrainian-Russian war. That's what's coming next. There will be a negotiated peace settlement or a negotiated surrender by Ukraine or whatever you want to call it. So the war is almost over because Ukraine no longer has any real ability to fight, but the U.S. can't look like the U.S. failed. So the U.S. has to set this up to say, oh, look at those evil Ukrainian leaders who duped us. Those are the ones who screwed everything up, and that's why we can't support them anymore. Too bad for them. They did this to themselves. That's going to be the narrative, even though that's not at all what happened. Zelensky was following the orders from the U.S. the entire time. Zelensky is a U.S. puppet and has been since he was put into power by people like Victoria Nuland. I mean, Zelensky, remember, he's an actor. He played the role of the president in a TV series that was funded by one of the wealthy, essentially donors or engineers there, like a wealthy globalist, you could say. And then he was put into office. This was a CIA-run coup to try to overthrow the previous government. Well, it was successful. The previous government was more friendly towards Russia. And the whole idea was to make Ukraine part of NATO, to position a bunch of missiles in Ukraine to threaten Russia, and ultimately to destroy Russia through economic sanctions and war so that the West could pillage Russia and steal all of Russia's resources, because that's the model of the U.S. empire. The U.S. empire can no longer compete based on goodwill or economic competitiveness or industrial production. The U.S. can't compete internationally. So the only thing they do now is they run around the world threatening to bomb and kill and murder everybody unless you do what we say. That's the model. And as you can see, it's still being carried out, destroying Nordstream. And then also now aiding with what Israel is doing in the Middle East and threatening more countries like Lebanon. And soon Iran, of course, that's coming too. So the U.S. cannot function in a neighborly way on the world stage. The U.S. can only function as a coercive bully that threatens to bomb and murder everybody if they don't go along. And so Ukraine is a totally screwed up situation from the point of view of the U.S. and NATO. So now they're going to have to cut ties, and they're going to have scapegoats, and that's going to be Chervinsky, Zelensky, and Zelensky. And remember, a lot of this is designed to protect Joe Biden, amazingly, to try to make it so that in the 2024 election, Biden doesn't look like another loser, which that's a tough task, to make Biden not look like a loser, that's for sure. But I think that the cover-up effort here is going to largely fail. I think that Biden does look like a loser. I think the U.S. is going to take so much flack from this internationally that when Ukraine, when the full surrender is signed or whatever it is, negotiated peace accord, whatever it is, I think Russia is going to end up with Odessa. I think Ukraine is going to lose most of its southern coastline. And the United States is going to look like a bunch of fools and idiots who couldn't even beat Russia in a proxy war in Ukraine. Couldn't put up a fight at all, even with the help of Germany and the United Kingdom and all these extra tanks and artillery pieces and HIMARS and F-16s and everything. All this, free military gear from all over the Western world shipped to Ukraine, and they still couldn't beat Russia. That's going to look bad for the U.S., and that's going to impact the way the world sees the dollar. In fact, I've recorded a separate podcast on this point, and I'm going to actually play that podcast for you here. I don't know, it's about maybe 20 minutes or something like that, that talks about this in more detail. It's the ramifications of the loss in Ukraine and how this is going to translate into a currency implosion for the United States of America. This is going to spell, one more nail in the coffin of the U.S. dollar. So we're going to get to that in just a second, and also then the full interview with Scott Ritter. I do want to remind you that this is the Black Friday weekend for our store, healthrangerstore.com. These are the best deals of the year, and we have good inventory. And we just put up a special on Friday, though it's almost sold out. It's called the Immune Support Super Pack. It's 6 different immune support products. It's got quercetin, N-acetylcysteine, organic elderberry and echinacea as a liquid, non-GMO vitamin C, plant-based vitamin D3 plus prickly pear drink mix packets, and then magnesium glycinate high absorption. Those 6 together in this pack, normally over $140, it's now $99.95, only while supplies last. And as I'm recording this, I think we have less than 200 of those remaining, so those are going to go fast. You can get that at healthrangerstore.com/Black Friday, or you can just search for Immune Support Super Pack at healthrangerstore.com. And then also, we have another combo pack that has a little bit higher levels of inventory. It's called the Liposomal Immunity Combo Pack. As you know, liposomal products, they are more bioavailable. And you can look up the science of liposomes, which is basically the nutrient is surrounded by a fatty acid that your body recognizes as natural food, and it helps with transportation and bioavailability of the nutrients throughout your body's cells. So we have a liposomal immunity combo pack. It's also only $99.95. It's got liposomal vitamin C. It's got liposomal vitamin D and K2, liposomal glutathione, which is really important for supporting natural detox and liver function, liposomal curcumin, that's from turmeric, plus resveratrol, one of the most amazing nutrients for cardiovascular support that anybody has ever discovered. And also then liposomal zinc in a liquid format, and then buffered vitamin C powder, 5 ounces of that, all that together, those 6 products for $99.95. So that's available now, healthrangerstore.com/Black Friday, but only while inventory lasts. And we've had a huge outpouring of support over the past couple of days during our Black Friday event. I want to thank you for your support and reassure you that we are getting orders out faster this year than ever before. And so if you ordered from us, you're going to get your shipment very, very quickly. And you're going to really enjoy the quality of these products. Everything that we sell is laboratory tested, as you know, for glyphosate, heavy metals, and also microbiology, E. coli, salmonella, yeast and mold, and so on. So we've got the cleanest foods and supplements in the industry. We do our own in-house laboratory testing, multiple mass spec instruments. And I showed you yesterday our new dioxin testing gas chromatography instrument. I gave you like a 5-minute video of that. Can't wait to get that up and running with actual samples. We'll be doing dioxin testing routinely of our animal products like whey protein. And nobody does routine dioxin testing. And in fact, nobody does routine heavy metals testing in this space that I'm aware of. I mean, at least not to the extent that we do with our strict standards. Nobody does this. So, super clean products, and it also helps support this platform and this network. So thank you for your support. Now, and these specials end Sunday night at midnight, by the way. With that said, then, I'm going to bring you now a special report I recorded earlier about the financial implications or the currency implosion that will happen to the United States as the Ukraine situation continues to erode, ultimately leading to some kind of political agreement that ends the war. That's coming probably in 2024. And then secondly, the interview with Scott Ritter, who has geopolitical analysis of all of this, including the Middle East, Israel versus Hamas, also what's happening in Gaza, and then Ukraine and Russia. So enjoy that special report and that interview, and I'll be back with you tomorrow. Well, because of the situation with Israel and the Palestinians, we haven't talked much about Ukraine lately. So this is going to be an update on the Ukraine situation, which is, of course, dire for Ukraine. Russia has won this conflict, and we are in the last chapter. This is the chapter that will probably lead to Zelensky either being removed via a military coup by his own people or otherwise forced to step down very, very soon. And here's what's happening. On the battlefield, the Western press, which has constantly lied about this entire conflict, they're claiming that there's a stalemate, that neither side can gain ground. And they've even claimed that Ukraine has taken back 50% of the territory that Russia once occupied. I mean, that is a very dishonest description of what's happened. The entire counteroffensive that has been now months in the making has gone virtually nowhere. No gains by Ukraine except, I don't know, maybe a few square kilometers total. I mean, it's nothing. The line basically hasn't moved for many months, and Russia is waiting this out, actually, which I'll get to in a second. But on the battlefield, Ukraine has run out of soldiers, and it pains me to know how many young men, how many lives were lost in this conflict. Hundreds of thousands of young Ukrainian men have been killed in this conflict. And it was needless, and it was all done by, well, the United States and Zelensky, who was a controlled puppet. This was all done to try to weaken Russia, and it failed, and those lives did not need to be lost. Understand that you've been lied to this entire time by the Western media, which of course is no surprise. Lied to about everything involving Ukraine and Russia, and now also the Middle East. That's no surprise. But we were always told that there would be some new super weapon. Oh, Ukraine's going to get Panzer, or not Panzer, Leopard 2 tanks, right? And, Ukraine's going to get Abrams tanks. Oh, Ukraine's going to get F-16s. And, Ukraine's going to get HIMARS missile systems and so on. Every few months, you heard another pronouncement like, this is going to change the war. It was all a lie. None of it changed the war. And a lot of that equipment has already been destroyed by Russia using, very advanced anti-air defense systems and Lancet drones and so on. So nothing from the West worked. In fact, the West showed itself to be really incompetent. And Zelensky is now painted as delusional by the corporate media, Newsweek in particular. And there have been interviews and articles in The Economist and other mainstream, even globalist, publications. The Economist is a globalist rag, you could say. Well, maybe rag isn't the right term for it. It's it's a pretty big deal publication, but it definitely answers to the globalists. And what has come out recently is that they're painting Zelensky as delusional. And this is clearly an effort to prepare to see Zelensky removed from power. Again, either through a coup, maybe an assassination, or maybe he's forced to resign. But one way or another, Zelensky's going to be removed, and then he's going to be blamed for the horrific mistakes, the losses, the miscalculations, all of that. A new regime will come into power in Ukraine, one that will be willing to negotiate with Russia for an end to this conflict. So that's where this is going. Make no mistake, okay? So just to summarize, Ukraine has lost this war. Russia is really just waiting on purpose. They're waiting for the West to run out of money. They're waiting for Zelensky to be removed from power. They're waiting for Ukraine to come to the negotiation table. Now, here's where it's going to get very interesting and also very difficult for the West. Russia will hold all the cards in negotiating the final peace arrangement. Russia holds all the cards. Russia does not need to negotiate. They could continue to push westward if they wanted to, and they could take a lot more territory, including Odessa, which, by the way, Odessa will end up in Russian hands by the time this is all said and done. So Ukraine is going to lose its southern coastline. Trust me, that's exactly what's going to happen. So Russia's going to set the terms on the negotiation for peace. Those terms will include not only Odessa, like I mentioned, but also, by the way, quite a bit of Ukrainian territory, probably more territory than what Russia currently controls, but not all of Ukraine. Russia does not want to control Western Ukraine because Western Ukraine, well, they hate Russia. I mean, they're not Russians. Ukraine has always been split east and west, where the east has always been Russian ethnic people. And most of those people have considered themselves to be Russian, whereas Western Ukraine, they've considered themselves to be Western Europeans, essentially. And they despise Russia. So Russia doesn't want to occupy Western Ukraine and try to force those people to love Mother Russia. That's never going to fly. So that's not going to be part of it. But what will be part of it is a constitutional amendment to Ukraine's constitution that makes sure that Ukraine never joins NATO and makes sure that Ukraine never hosts bioweapons facilities for Western countries, and also makes sure that Ukraine never hosts missiles, missile launch sites for Western countries. So Ukraine is going to be substantially reduced in size, reduced in economic output. It's going to lose its ports, like I said, and it's going to lose its standing with NATO because, the push to make Ukraine part of NATO won't fly any longer when this peace accord is finally signed. And this probably won't happen this calendar year. That's too soon. It is likely to happen sometime in 2024. And there may be additional efforts on the part of the West to try to provoke Russia into more military attacks or even to try to escalate this to a nuclear war. But so far, Putin has resisted those efforts, and the West is now very much occupied with Israel. Even the Western media is occupied with Israel. And funding for Ukraine is on its last legs. If there's any more money that's going to be sent to Ukraine, it's probably the last chapter of that. There won't be billions more. Now, granted, the corrupt Ukrainian officials, they milked this pretty darn good, and so did the corrupt United States officials and the corrupt, weapons industry people and, State Department people. Everybody got paid. I mean, if you think $110 billion actually went to the front lines of Ukraine, you're kidding yourself, right? The soldiers didn't get that in terms of food, ammunition, clothing, first aid. They didn't get that in terms of ammo. Almost none of that went to the soldiers. It went to the pockets of corrupt officials in Ukraine and the United States. It was a giant money laundering racket. That's what every war is, it turns out, a giant money laundering racket. And this was no different. But that racket, its time is up, and Ukraine will not survive this intact as it currently stands. Mark my words. Russia will force Ukraine to sign essentially a surrender, but it may not be called that in the media. It will probably be painted as some kind of, victory by Ukraine. Some like, we got Russia to stop. Yeah, but Russia forced you into the terms that Russia wanted. So now, Ukraine isn't, of course, the only nation impacted by this defeat. The United States will be impacted. So for the last section here in this podcast, I want to cover that. What are the ramifications for the West? Of course, Western Europe, it has been, its economy has been imploded or partially destroyed by this due to the lack of energy supplies from Russia, which all stems from the economic sanctions that have been inflicted on Russia by the United States, and also, cut off from the SWIFT system, but also the bombing of the Nordstream pipeline. So this is why Germany's economy is imploding, and France's, and the UK to some extent as well. That's all going to continue. So it's just like the US to wade into a conflict, like throw a bunch of bombs everywhere, destroy a bunch of infrastructure, and then just leave hell on earth for all those countries that are affected. Like, see you later after bombing everything and destroying everything. See you. Hope life is good for you, Goodbye. We're going back home to the U.S. It's just like the U.S. to do that. But the U.S. is also going to suffer horribly from this as well. And here's why. The military defeat of Ukraine will be seen globally by other world leaders as a military defeat of the United States and of NATO. Now, this will factor in very strongly in the Middle East. This will, in effect, embolden nations like Turkey and Iran and others, perhaps Syria at some point, and Lebanon, or at least Hezbollah, this will embolden those groups to be more aggressive in their stance against Israel, knowing that the United States has failed to defend Ukraine, and therefore the thinking goes, how can the United States really defend Israel? Now, granted, the United States has a very powerful Navy with 2 aircraft carrier strike force groups near Israel right now, which means the U.S. can deploy lots of bombs, from fighter jets that can drop ordnance. They can also launch hundreds of cruise missiles from all of the other ships that are part of the strike force carrier group. The U.S. can inflict a tremendous amount of damage, no question about it, but they can't really put boots on the ground in any kind of numbers that would make a difference. Sure, they can deploy, a couple thousand U.S. Marines or Navy SEALs or Special Forces, and the word is some of that's already happening, that there are, in fact, U.S. Special Forces troops fighting in Gaza right now. That's what I've been told from now 2 different sources. I can't confirm it, but I'll pass that along in case you see that confirmed somewhere else. But the U.S. can't deploy a wave of ground forces to fight, let's say, the Turkish army. I mean, give me a break. And if the U.S. did, the U.S. would fail, because the U.S. can't even beat Russia via Ukraine, not with all the tanks and bombers and artillery and everything in the world. The U.S. just doesn't have an effective fighting force any longer, because the Pentagon's all gone woke, and the culture of the American people is a culture of, snowflakeism and wokeism and apathy and laziness among the younger generations in particular. There are exceptions to that, homeschooled kids that grew up on ranches and so on. They're very, very capable. But by and large, the culture of America's youth has collapsed into, a pathetic state that really can't provide the military soldiers, fighting soldiers. And fighting soldiers can't be snowflakes, not if they're going to be effective. So all of these countries in the Middle East that are watching this are going to be looking at what happens with Ukraine, and they're going to say, wow, the U.S. is weaker than we thought. And again, that's going to embolden those countries in the Middle East. Now, another factor that's very important is global de-dollarization. So nations of the world are very much aware that the dollar is collapsing because of the mad money printing by the U.S. Federal Reserve and the Treasury. $33 trillion in debt right now, and the U.S. is paying $1 trillion a year in interest on the debt. And already, internationally, the number of people, or let's say nations and institutions, willing to purchase U.S. treasuries, i.e. U.S. Treasury debt, that number is dwindling rapidly. In fact, just this last week, there was a catastrophic failure to sell U.S. treasuries. And the net result is that, of course, higher interest rates are going to have to be offered, or yields, as they're called, in order to entice foreign buyers to buy more U.S. Treasury debt. Well, this is only going to raise the cost of paying interest on the debt for the United States government, and it's only going to accelerate the total financial collapse of the U.S. empire, which Russia sees coming, China sees that coming, and of course, Iran and all the other nations see it coming as well, including Saudi Arabia, by the way. So if the U.S. fails in Ukraine and Zelensky's removed and, Russia is victorious, this is going to accelerate the global move away from the dollar. And that will have catastrophic consequences on the ability of the United States to sell off treasury debt. And more nations will join the BRICS nations. And the whole BRICS system, I have since learned, is about to be rolled out next summer, the summer of 2024. So with nations moving away from the dollar, you're going to see them selling off dollar holdings and selling off treasuries, which will make it even more expensive for the U.S. to sell off treasuries and have to offer even higher yields. And then the end result of that is that the Federal Reserve is going to have to print the money to buy treasury debt. And this begins, and by the way, that has already begun, but this puts you in a place where you have a doom cycle of hyperinflation, where you're printing your own currency to pay the interest on your debt because there are no more international buyers of your debt, or very few, relatively speaking. And thus, you just have to keep printing and printing and printing. And that ends in, a hyperinflationary blowout. That ends in something resembling Weimar Germany, although perhaps not as exacerbated as that historical situation, but it ends very quickly. And I've heard arguments over the years. People say, "Oh, that can't happen because there's so many countries using the dollar. It's the world reserve currency." Yeah, it was. But this is my point. That's changing. I mean, even since the U.S. military pulled out of Kabul and, failed in Afghanistan. I mean, look at that failure. The world saw that and said, my goodness, the U.S. military really cannot project much power. And so that's like strike one. And if the U.S. fails in Ukraine, that's strike two. The world is looking at that and saying, my God, they can't even defend Ukraine against Russia, a country that the West said was nothing but an elaborate gas station. Well, this gas station country just beat all of NATO, by the way. So that's strike two. What do you think strike three is going to be? Yeah, failure in the Middle East, right? Failure in the Middle East. The U.S. is, of course, providing weapons and money and soldiers and expertise to Israel. And while I have no doubt that Israel will end up destroying whatever it wants in Gaza because, it's all surrounded, and the Gazans don't have an air force or anything like that. I mean, they're surrounded and trapped at this point. But Israel will likely fail to defend itself against other countries if this war escalates, which means that the United States will also be seen as failing to defend its allies. And that will be strike three. And it's like 3 strikes, you're out. 3 strikes and we dump the dollar. And nations like Saudi Arabia or the UAE or even, Venezuela or whatever. I mean, we're talking about nations in Southeast Asia, South America, African nations especially, and nations across the Middle East. They will choose to dump the dollar because it's losing value every day, and they will embrace something like the BRICS currency system. So understand that the defeat of Ukraine by Russia is setting all of this into motion. And the upshot is we're talking about the collapse of Western Europe in terms of its economy. So Western Europe is done. Western Europe will not survive much longer. It's also being completely overrun with migrants, by the way, and that was always part of the plan. Western Europe will cease to exist as anything resembling what it once was. But the United States of America, the U.S. empire, is also at risk of a total financial collapse, which would cause a breaking up of the United States of America. And given that this country is so bifurcated anyway, so polarized, it's hard to see what kind of force could bring the Union back together when there are states like Texas, where I am, that just can't wait to declare their independence, by the way, and become the Republic of Texas once again. Texas used to be its own nation, and it can certainly go back to that, and it can have its own currency, and the Texas economy would absolutely boom. I mean, it would be a golden age to live in Texas when it has an honest currency and you don't have to send half your money to Washington, D.C. to be spent on, bombs for Israel or whatever. Texas would just boom, and so would Florida, and so would most of the Midwest and the flyover states and so on. The states that would collapse would be California and Illinois because of all the Democrats in Chicago, and probably, New York because of all the Democrats in New York City and New Jersey and so on. Of course, Massachusetts and Connecticut would be goners because nobody in charge there understands anything about economics, for starters, nor freedom, by the way, which is kind of a shame. Oregon and Washington would probably experience internal, civil wars, because you'd have the vast majority of Oregonians and Washingtonians, I think is the right word. They are rural people versus the insane, left-wing libtard city people. And you'd probably see a lot of fighting in those states. Anyway, we're talking about not just a civil war. We're talking about secession, the balkanization of the United States, and multiple civil wars inside various states. And that would make the United States of America history, and it would obviously, weaken the entire continent of North America. Canada would suffer as well. And that would put China and Russia in the driver's seat on the world stage, but especially China. And if the United States of America collapses, then everybody's going to use BRICS. And then China becomes the dominant industrial nation on the planet. And China and Russia and Brazil and other nations together become the dominant new world reserve currency. And then the U.S. actually collapses into destitution, famine, internal strife, chaos, violence, all those things. It might get so bad that, the Mexicans would flee back south across the border. It's like, we got to get out of the United States. It's collapsing. It's worse than Mexico. I mean, who knows? And then you'd have the Mexican government putting up a wall to stop people from coming across to the south, Wouldn't that be funny? So Mexico can build a wall, but the United States can't. Anyway, that's the analysis of where all this is going. The bottom line is Ukraine has lost. It's done. Okay, it's over. Ukraine cannot win this war. Russia will not be defeated. Russia will dictate the terms of surrender, or however you want to call it, the terms of peace, but it will essentially be a surrender. And then there will be implications spanning the globe for many, many years to come, and the United States will end up with a lot less power, less influence, and probably a financial collapse to boot. Although it will take time. It won't be right away. It'll take time for all this to ripple through the system. But that's what's coming. So if you want to get prepared, let me give a couple of sponsor plugs here. Of course, BeReady123.com. They offer the solar panels and the solar generators that will work when the power grid goes down. So that's something important to check out. BeReady123.com. And then for gold and silver, physical stuff in your hands, it's the Treasure Island Coins and Precious Metals Company. And you can find them at metalswithmike.com. And it's a fantastic time to preserve your assets in gold and silver. And I'm not talking about speculation, just preservation. But check out metalswithmike.com. You can see their prices in real time, very competitive, and they have insured, discreet delivery. So thank you for listening today. Mike Adams here, the Health Ranger for naturalnews.com, and also, of course, Brighteon.com. Take care. All right, welcome back. Mike Adams here, joining you from the Brighteon studios in Central Texas. And this is the Alex Jones Show, third hour today. And we're joined by former UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter, who has done an enormous quantity of interviews analyzing the current situation. And I've probably listened to most of them, frankly. And Scott Ritter, he definitely ruffles some feathers, but it's refreshing to hear somebody who isn't self-censoring about his views and analysis, and his history makes him extremely well qualified to comment on this situation. I mean, extremely qualified. So welcome to the show, Mr. Ritter. It's an honor to have you on today.
Well, thank you very much for having me on.
Well, thank you for joining us. And how many interviews do you do each day? I'm just curious because it seems like a lot.
I've actually been trying to cut back because I earn my living from writing. And when I'm doing interviews, I'm not writing. But today, I think you are the fourth interview today, and I have two more after this. So I'm not getting much writing done today.
No, apparently not. But you are getting some feather ruffling done for sure with some of your analysis. But let's start with that. I heard you say yesterday, I believe with Redacted, that the show on YouTube with Clayton, I think I heard you say that Israel is carrying out the largest scale wholesale slaughter of civilians in our modern times, or at least that's a close paraphrase of what you said. Can we start there? and your observations of what Israel is actually literally doing right now in Gaza.
Well, first of all, we need to understand that Gaza is some people have likened it to a prison, but the problem with that analogy is that prisoners have committed a crime. The only crime that the Palestinians of Gaza have committed is apparently being born in Gaza. It's the more accurate term would be concentration camp, and it's been an open air concentration camp run by Israel on behalf of Israel since 1948. The current campaign that's being run by Israel has three aspects to it. The first aspect is the forcible relocation of over 1 million Palestinians from northern Gaza, the northern Gaza Strip, to the southern Gaza Strip. This is a war crime, first of all. Israel has no authority to do this. Let's just preface this entire conversation by noting that under international law, Israel is an occupier. The Palestinians are occupied, and the occupier has no inherent right of self-defense against anything the occupied do in opposition to the occupier. So everything Israel is doing is a war crime, just by definition, given their stance. Even if we you don't buy into that, the forcible relocation of 1 million people under the threat of death, because that's what the Israelis have said. If you remain here, you will die. You will be treated as the enemy. This is collective punishment. This is indiscriminate targeting of civilians. It's a war crime. If the Israeli generals were ever put before a court of proper jurisdiction, they could spend the rest of their lives in jail for the crimes they are committing today, because they know they're committing crimes. They just operate as if they are above the law. So the forcible relocation of over 1 million people is the foundation of this crime. The second part of it is, of course, the indiscriminate bombardment of civilians, the collective punishment of the citizens of Gaza, the Palestinian civilians. The Israelis have a policy that they've been implementing since 2006. In 2006, Israel fought a short and ultimately losing war against Hezbollah. Part of the frustration that Israel manifested because they weren't able to defeat Hezbollah was to hold the Lebanese population accountable for Israel's inability to prevail on the battlefield. And they did so by indiscriminately bombing, leveling, destroying, annihilating entire neighborhoods. The Dahiwa doctrine the name is of a suburb of West Beirut, which was flattened by Israel. Collective punishment. They made they didn't disguise it. They said, we're punishing the citizens of Lebanon for allowing Hezbollah to exist. Collective punishment. And they've been doing it ever since. Since 2008. Go ahead.
Let me jump in. Sorry to interrupt. But let me jump in. May I call you Scott for the remainder of this interview? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's my name.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just to be a little less formal, but what in your view what would Israel's response, what could have Israel done in response to the October 7th Hamas attacks that would have been consistent with international humanitarian law and the Geneva Convention and so on? So what should they or could they have done that would not be indiscriminate bombing and war crimes?
Well, the first thing is Israel should have been smart enough to know that they are walking into a Hamas trap, that Hamas was luring them into Gaza. This war is an extension of politics by other means. And, what Hamas was doing was setting Israel up for failure, knowing that Israel would implement the Dahiwa doctrine, begin the indiscriminate bombing. What Israel should have done is secure the border and then turn to the United Nations through inciting Article 51 and begin a debate in the United Nations. This would have been a very difficult debate for the United Nations to have, because there would have been those in the United Nations who would have said, like Russia has already argued, that Israel has no inherent right to self-defense because they are the occupiers, the Palestinians are the occupied. This is derived from a 2004 opinion of the International Justice Court, which dealt with the status of Israel vis-a-vis Gaza. But Israel would have had the moral strength with them of saying, we were just attacked. 1,400 Israelis are killed, many of them civilians. Don't play niceties with me, the United Nations. Don't sit here and play word games. What are you collectively going to do about this problem? And throw the issue onto the United Nations and create a debate that Hamas didn't want. Because remember, this is a political war. It's not a military war. This is not a war that's going to be won by scoring more deaths. In fact, Israel's insistence on punishing the Palestinian people have caused them to lose this political war because the world has turned against them. In the United States, the streets are filled not with protesters saying we are with Israel, but protesters saying we are with Palestine. If Israel had done what I just said, turn to the United Nations, cite Article 51, say, how are you collectively going to defend us from this attack? The streets today would be filled with protesters on the side of Israel because Israel would have deserved to have been supported in that event. But that's not what they did. They chose the sword. You live by the sword, you die by the sword.
So you believe that Hamas had calculated that Israel's response would be overwhelmingly driven by rage and that Israel would target intentionally civilians, which means that at some level, Hamas also predicted that their brothers and sisters, their Palestinian brothers and sisters, would be killed as part of this, and that would make the case of Israel's brutality. Do you think that level of awareness was pre-calculated by Hamas?
100%. Look, Hamas carried out one of the most effective, well-planned military operations in modern history. You can call it an act of terror. I wouldn't. It was a military operation. They took on the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, in a stand-up fight and beat them. They beat the 13th Battalion of the Golani Brigade. They beat the 51st Battalion of the Golani Brigade. They beat the 7th Armored Brigade. They beat the Special Forces of Israel. On October 7th, Hamas won a decisive military victory against Israel. It was a military victory, not an act of terrorism. Now, when we speak of the goal of luring Israel in, of course they did. Why do you take hostages and bring them back into Gaza and put them underground? Because you're challenging the Israelis to come in and go for them. When Israel has no plan, they knew Israel has no plan because Israel never, ever considered the possibility of a military attack from Hamas out of Gaza of this scope and scale. Israel had no contingency planning. Everything they're doing right now is being made up on the spot, and it's revenge-oriented, and Hamas knew that. Hamas knew that the Dahiwa doctrine would be implemented in full. Now, you can say that that's very callous, but I'll offer this from history. In the early 1944, as the United States, Great Britain, Canada were planning the invasion of Normandy, D-Day, they went to Charles de Gaulle, who's the head of the Free French forces, and said, you know, we're going to liberate France, but when we do so, the French population of Normandy is going to be caught in the middle, and there will be casualties. And de Gaulle said, how many? And they said tens of thousands. And he said, do what you need to do. These will be losses that have to be occurred. We have to suffer these losses to get our liberty. 60,000 French civilians were killed by the Allies during the Normandy invasion. 60,000. That was done in the name of liberty. Now, if you're a Palestinian civilian, if you're a Palestinian politician, and your goal and objective is a Palestinian state, how many Palestinians are you willing to lose in that cause, knowing that if you don't engage in this battle, there will never be a free Palestine? And so those people who sit there and say Hamas is this, Hamas is that, Hamas is no different than Charles de Gaulle when it comes to understanding that there has to be a price paid by the civilian population if you're going to achieve your objective of an independent state.
Well, that's definitely going to get some reaction, what you just said. But let me redirect and ask you this. Clearly, some of the casualties of the Hamas attacks on October 7th were civilian, not military. You're correct, I believe, in mentioning that many of them were military targets, but clearly there was a mix, right? Some military, some civilian. But one question I've been burning to ask you, and this is an earnest, honest question, because many of my other sources have said they believe that the IDF, at least portions of it, were intentionally ordered to stand down in order to allow this attack to occur. I'm curious about your thoughts on that analysis, because I've heard you say that Hamas defeated Israel or IDF forces on that day, which clearly they did in some degree. But is it also possible that some elements of IDF were ordered to stand down because the political benefits to Netanyahu of this attack have been the justification of this war on Gaza that is a goal towards a greater Israel? What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I have worked with the Israeli Defense Forces in a very intimate way. From 1994 to 1998, I worked with Israeli intelligence, Amman, on the Iraq weapons of mass destruction issue. I spent a lot of time in Israel with these soldiers, shoulder to shoulder, going over the intelligence, planning operations, and such. And I will just say this: the idea that an Israeli politician or an Israeli general would sacrifice in such a callous manner the lives of an Israeli soldier is absurd in the extreme. No responsible person would ever think that the case. The Israelis treasure Israeli life so much. This is why they're in the fix they are, because their military has an over-reliance upon technology, because they don't want their boys and girls to die in combat. They make an overuse of air power to keep the enemy suppressed so they don't have to engage in this kind of fight. The idea that an Israeli politician, even one as cynical as Benjamin Netanyahu, say what you want about him, and I despise him openly despise the man. He served in the IDF. He served in the Sariyat Matkal. His brother died at Entebbe. And if you think Benjamin Netanyahu is going to stand by and let Israeli boys and girls be killed deliberately by Hamas, then you don't know Benjamin Netanyahu, you don't know the IDF, you don't know Israel. No, it's impossible that this could be the case. I'm a big believer in the theory of incompetence. I believe that the Israelis were incompetent. I believe that the Israelis were asleep at the wheel. I believe that they disregarded intelligence about the attack. I believe they made a number of mistakes. But the one thing they didn't do, and I will never accuse them of doing, is callously allowing Hamas to carry out an attack of this scope and scale for political gain. No, I reject that.
Okay.
It's just 100%.
Thank you for answering that. And I strongly respect your views on this and your analysis. So that means, as I've heard you say in other interviews, that then Hamas they militarily defeated the IDF on that day, which shows, and I believe I've heard you say this, that the Zionists are not superhuman, right? That they can be, I don't even want to say the word. I mean, they can be defeated as well as any other human being on this planet, and that some of what the Zionists tell themselves or tell the soldiers, and I'm not saying that all Israelis are Zionists by any means, but they tell themselves that they are superior. And is that giving them a false sense of competence that is perhaps not actually deserved? And are we seeing some of that in Gaza right now with the casualties of IDF soldiers and some of the armor that's being taken out point blank range by Hamas fighters with very few weapons?
Just a couple things. First, let me back up just a second and talk about civilian casualties real quick. On October 7th, there were three distinct civilian casualty producing events. The first is the military assault carried out by Hamas against the Gaza military barrier. The military barrier around Gaza consists of a wall, other barriers, and then a series of military installations interposed with kibbutz, the civilian, but the civilian neighborhoods are militarized. Please don't view them as Mom and Pa's little village in Iowa where they go out and they milk the cows every morning. These are militarized facilities manned by settlers who are armed. They are an integral part of the barrier around Gaza. They provide basing infrastructure, logistical infrastructure for the military bases. So when Hamas launched his attack, piercing the fence, I believe 17 to 24 distinct locations, they pushed in. And when they move into a kibbutz, they view the kibbutz as a military object. And so remember, there are defense forces in each kibbutz. Some of these defense forces mobilized and were able to repel the Hamas attack. So to pretend that these are innocent defenseless civilians is absurd, because the evidence shows that when the civilians had a chance to get their weapons, go to their duty positions, they repelled the Hamas attack. So you're assaulting a kibbutz knowing there's a defense force there. You have to come in hard, fast, and you have to carry out your objectives of suppressing that. So you assault the homes where the armed people could leave, and some people got killed. There's no doubt about that. Were civilians caught up in the crossfire? Absolutely. But this is not targeted assassination. This is a military assault against a military position where civilians were caught in the middle. Now, the second kind of assault, once Hamas pierced these, I mean, you're looking at the robotic cannons there. Once Hamas pierced this defense line and moved on to their objectives, the holes in the fence were still there. And what came through that is a second wave and a third wave of non-Hamas armed militants. These are other Palestinian groups who were not part of the Hamas planning. These were other Palestinians who had weapons, who had a grudge against the Israelis, and they came through. These people, I believe, carried out the majority of the crimes against civilians. These people came in with revenge in mind. These people were the ones who shot the civilians indiscriminately, etc. So that's the second level of violence. But the vast majority of the Israelis killed were from the third level of violence, and that is the Israeli defense response, which was haphazard and heavy-handed. We know for a fact that in one of the kibbutzes, a lady has said, I was with 20 people who were held hostage by 8 Hamas fighters. The IDF came in and Hamas wanted to negotiate the surrender of the hostages and them. The IDF opened fire, killing 8 hostages and 18 Israeli civilians. One was left wounded, one survived. The head of security of the kibbutz says the IDF came in and indiscriminately fired. At the open air concert, majority of the people were killed by a crossfire between Hamas and Israeli security. This is the third level of violence that Israel does not want to talk about, because to talk about it will further shine light on the incompetence of the Israeli defense forces.
But that's consistent with the way Israel is treating Palestinian civilians. And we've seen Israeli officials say that even that there are no real Palestinian civilians. They're all treated as enemy combatants, even if they're cancer patients in a cancer hospital, or a pregnant woman, or a child, or a refugee, a wounded refugee. They're all treated as combatants. But to think that Israel would do that to its own citizens in order to increase the body count of the number of Israelis killed on that day, that's a horrifying thought. But how does that? Yes.
I'm not saying they did it to increase the body count. I'm not saying that an Israeli general said, there's only 600 dead people, let's kill another 800 so we have a big number. What I'm saying is the Israelis were panicked that day. Literally, if you look at the stories of the response, a brigade commander's at home because it was Yom Kippur. He gets a phone call that the Hamas is over the wire. He gets in his vehicle. He drives towards the front line. He stops at a truck stop, picks up 2 soldiers. He stops at a base. It's chaos. He grabs people, puts them in a truck, and he rushes to the sound of gunfire. And he's panicked. He sees people moving. He doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't have normal command and control. And so when there's a fight, when there's a problem, they address it with gunfire, and there's no care for sussing out the problem. They didn't say, who's in that building? What's going on? They simply said, Hamas, fire, take it. And many of the people they killed weren't Hamas. The majority of the casualties were these bumbling idiot Gazans with their guns running around having a party, and suddenly the IDF shows up and they get in a firefight with these guys. But they're the ones that are intermingled with the Israeli civilians. They slaughtered hundreds of Israelis that day. The IDF slaughtered them.
Okay. This is horrifying. All of this violence. I know that you would like to see a de-escalation of this, as I would. None of us want to see this violence taking place. Scott, before we go to break here, give us your website or how people can follow your interviews and writings.
I put it all under scottritterextra.com. So if you go to scottritterextra.com, that's my Substack. And there's also up there, you can find links to the various podcasts that I do, my own. And then if I'm invited by other people, I always put a link up there. And so scottritterextra.com is the best place to go to.
Okay, got it. scottritterextra.com. We've got about a minute left, and I want to get your take on the fact that a high-level Israeli official, the cultural minister, recently suggested the possibility of nuking Gaza. He was then suspended by Netanyahu. But quickly, is this a confirmation in your view that Israel absolutely does have nukes? I mean, I think the world knows that, but what do you make from that comment?
Well, I've read that comment. I've looked at it very closely. He said nuclear-like. And already you've had people say, for instance, Eva Bartlett, who's a pro-Palestinian journalist, has likened the amount of bombs dropped by Israel on Gaza to a Hiroshima-like event. A 12 kiloton weapon, 12,000 tons of high explosive. Israel's already dropped over 20 tons, so nearly 2 atomic bomb equivalents. So people have said that without alluding to the actual use of a nuclear weapon. He is responding to a comment made by a reporter. He didn't initiate the nuclear thing.
Sorry to cut you off, Scott. We got to go to break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with former UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter right after this quick break. All right, welcome back, folks. Mike Adams here, joining you from the Brighteon studios in Central Texas, here on the Alex Jones Show, the second half of the third hour, and we continue with former UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter at scottritterextra.com. But we are continuing with our geopolitical analysis with Scott Ritter. Now, Scott, here's a question that I pose to people. A lot of people like to take sides on this. Obviously, you hear people, oh, I'm pro-Israel. And I ask them, well, what does that mean? Do you support everything that Israel is doing? Or other people say, oh, I'm pro-Palestine. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean you support everything Hamas is doing? And I tend to ask people, hey, if some Hamas fighters were found hiding out in New York City, would you support the mass carpet bombing of New York City? And would you tell the people, who died there, it's your fault you didn't evacuate? We dropped leaflets. We told you, get out of New York City. We're going to bomb the hospitals. We're going to bomb the universities. We're going to bomb the residential apartments to get those Hamas people. And any civilians, well, it's their own fault for being there, because that's exactly what we're hearing in defense of Israel's actions in Gaza. Does that sound about right of what we're hearing, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely indiscriminate what's going on. Look, we've had situations. We've had the Symbionese Liberation Army. We've had the Weathermen. We've had we Black Panthers. We have a history of domestic terrorists. This is a police action. It's a law enforcement action in the United States. We've never, though, had a problem like Hamas. Hamas is, first of all, Hamas wouldn't be hiding in New York City. If we want to make the analogy, Hamas is New York City, meaning that what Hamas has done is they are the government of New York. It's like the mayor. The mayor of New York City is Hamas, and he considers New York. He considers New York City to be occupied by the United States, and so he's at war with the United States. And what he's done to protect his government and his police force is that he's put them underground in the subway system, and they dug even deeper tunnels, and they're underground. That's to prevent being hit. And so now they're in the New York subway system. They're underground, and they're fed up. So they sortie out into New Jersey, and they go over the bridge. They take out Fort Lee. They take out some other places. They go down to Atlantic City and mess up the casinos, and they go up to Mahwah, and they take hostages, and they come back with a bunch of James Gandolfini type New Jersey mafia types that they've taken hostage, and they have them down in the subway system, and they're telling everybody else, come and get them, come and get them. And so now we come into New York City. We know they're in the subway system, but what we opt to do is take down the World Trade Center. We opt to take down the Empire State Building. We take down Macy's. We take down Times Square. We take down anything that has nothing to do with the subway system and everything to do with just punishing the people of New York. That would be a more accurate analogy.
I see. Wow. And, on top of that, don't forget, Mayor Eric Adams has said that New York City may not survive the influx of illegals that are coming. And then we're seeing now many leftists in Congress saying that we should take on the Palestinian refugees that are fleeing Gaza, 1 million of them. And people who are more conservative are saying, no way, we already have too much of a migrant crisis, especially in places like New York City right now. But what's your assessment of the real risk of extremism of some of those illegals in the United States, or maybe they were stable before, but now because of these current events, they are easily recruited into extremist acts in America. Do you think that's a real risk?
Look, you always have to be, first of all, every nation has to be in control of its borders and has to be in control of its immigration policies. You can't make a definitive statement about a risk assessment if you don't know what the problem is, if you don't know who you've allowed in. In the past, look, my wife is an immigrant. She's from the former Soviet Union, from Georgia. She came here legally. She was vetted. They knew who she was, and there was a good reason to believe that she would assimilate, into America. We are a melting pot. Not a single one of us, unless you're a Native American Indian, can say, I'm from this area. We all came from someplace else. And our grandparents, our great-grandparents, somewhere along the line, they came in and were absorbed and were expected to assimilate into what America is. And we don't know how to define America because, I mean, if you go up to Minnesota, they have, a different immigration base. If you go down to Arizona, a different immigration base. But they all call themselves Americans. We believe in the Constitution, the rule of law, things of that nature. So I'm not afraid of people who come in seeking to become part of America. If your goal is to come to America, and even if your goal is done illegally, I mean, I have sympathy for the illegal immigrant who says, I want a better life. Come in. But the problem is, if you don't control this system, there are some very bad actors out there who will take advantage of the lack of certainty, the lack of security to infiltrate people in. Now, do I want to condemn all illegal immigrants? No, but we do have to understand that there is the potential of this. But see, these people would have been radicalized before they came in. I'm not worried, to be honest, about the Palestinian American community becoming radicalized by what's going on today. In fact, I think the Palestinian American community is becoming empowered by what's going on today because for the first time, they see the potential of the creation of a Palestinian state. That's why they're in the streets demonstrating the ultimate expression of American free speech, freedom of association, freedom to speak. They're not blowing up buses. They're not blowing up restaurants. They're demonstrating, saying, we are advocating on behalf of this issue. And whether you agree with them or not, it's the quintessential American way of doing business.
Okay. To add to that, and thank you for that answer, my wife is also an immigrant, by the way, legal immigrant, been an American citizen for 30 years at this point, but an immigrant from Taiwan. So I completely agree with you. Many of the best Americans that I know are legal immigrants, by the way. I mean, because they get it. Many of them, I know people who came from, let's say, Iraq, and they lived through hell. They lived through Christians being murdered, executed for their beliefs. And they came to America and they understand the American spirit. And now they're Iraqi Americans who are,
real quick.
Yes, go ahead.
You know what your wife and my wife have in common? And that differentiates them from the majority of native-born Americans? They had to take a test on the U.S. Constitution to become citizens.
True.
They know the Constitution better than the vast majority of Americans who were born into the system but don't understand that which defines us. So God bless your wife. God bless my wife. God bless every immigrant who comes and becomes a naturalized citizen, and they know what it means to be an American more than many Americans born here. Because I would challenge this, the test your wife took. I challenge your audience right now. The audience listening, be honest with yourself. Go take the test, the constitutional test to become an American citizen. Take it. Don't cheat. Don't Google the answers. Take it. 98% of you will fail. 98% of you will fail.
You're probably right about that. And also, of course, you have to take the test in English, or at least my wife did, which means you have to have some mastery of the English language. But look, we're about to go to break. Stay with us, Scott. On the other side, I want to ask your detailed analysis of the risk of escalation into a much wider regional war. I want to ask your opinion of, can Iran be provoked? Because we see Senator Lindsey Graham clearly wants to provoke Iran to give justification for the U.S. to strike Iran. And also Turkey, of course. We've got to talk about Turkey. I'd like your bigger picture analysis of all of that when we return. And I really appreciate your time here. I know that you a lot of what you say is controversial. I want to remind the audience that this platform is a free speech platform, and that our audience may or may not agree with everything you've said, but we believe in your right to say it. And I think that you are operating in the interest of overall peace. So please stay with us, Scott. We'll be right back after this break with those questions straight ahead. All right, welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. Mike Adams here, guest hosting today. This is our final segment with UN Weapons Inspector, or former UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter. And his website is scottritterextra.com, and he does a lot of interviews, and he's also an author and, of course, geopolitical analyst. Now, Scott, I asked you before the break for your take. I'll just turn it right over to you. What is the risk of escalation that would bring this to a regional war that would, provoke Iran or Turkey or Syria or other nations to get kinetically involved?
Well, this is a very dangerous situation, and the reason is because Israel is panicked right now. Israel has for several years now considered this very scenario. What would happen if all of our enemies attacked us at once? Last year they did an exercise called Chariots of Fire. This year they did an exercise called Firm Hand. Both exercises were done with the support of the United States in terms of counter-Iranian operations, because Israel learned from these exercises that they cannot take on Iran by themselves, that if they're going to fight Iran, the United States must be involved. Bad news for Israel is that neither Israel nor the United States, isolated or together, can provide the kind of immediate strategic defeat of Iran that would preclude an Iranian attack that would devastate Israel, destroy Israel. And so Israel knows what the consequences are. They also know that Hezbollah, if they become engaged, has 200,000 rockets, 200,000. 100,000 are unguided. They'd saturate Israel in the first 3 or 4 days, exhausting the Iron Dome system, forcing them to use up all of their ammunition. And then the final 100,000 are precision-guided rockets that would destroy every target in Israel. There's not 100,000 targets in Israel, but they would destroy the industrial, the military, the political infrastructure of Israel. This is a reality. Hamas troops, 50 to 80,000 of them, are combat hardened, well-trained. They have tunnels that will take them into northern Israel. And if Hamas engages decisively, there's a risk that Israel would lose northern Israel up to the Sea of Galilee.
Are you talking about Hezbollah?
Hezbollah, yes. Okay. Hezbollah.
Okay, yes.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Israel knows, but here's the good news in all of this. The good news is that Hamas did this by themselves. Hamas did not plan with Hezbollah. They did not plan with Iran. That this took Hezbollah and Iran by surprise. Hassan Nasrallah admits this. He gave a major speech last Friday where he said, we had no clue that this was happening. And it is, we have been trying to come up with an adequate response. We reached out to our Hamas brothers to say, what do you want from us? And you know what Hamas told them? Nothing. Don't do anything. We're in control. We have a plan. The plan is being implemented exactly the way we want it, because Hamas's goals and objectives in this are not the physical destruction of Israel, but the creation of the political opportunity for the creation of a Palestinian state. For the first time in a long time, the world is talking about the potential of creating a Palestinian state. This is because of what Hamas did. Hamas wants 5,000 or more Palestinian prisoners who have been taken by the Israelis without due process, without charges, just put in prison, and they're held there indefinitely. They want them released. This is why they took the hostages, to exchange them for 5,000. Israel's been taking Palestinian hostages on a daily basis. There's over 130 kids, Palestinian kids, in Israeli jail right now for crime of what? Throwing a rock, giving an Israeli soldier a dirty look. This is insane. So that's what Hamas. And then the last thing is Hamas wants, and this should resonate with your audience, because I understand that your audience, many of them are fundamentalist Christians. They're good Christians. They believe in Christ, and they understand what a holy site is. They understand what sites of religious importance are. The third holiest site in Islam is the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. It's the third holiest site. And Israel desecrates it on a daily basis. Israel goes into the mosque and interferes with the worshipers. Israel has gone into the women's section and beat up the female worshipers because they worship separately, the women and the men. They've gone in and arrested men inside. They've terrorized people. They've thrown tear gas into the third most holiest site in Islam. Hamas wants that to end. They want guarantees so that Al-Aqsa can be treated with the sanctity that a religious site of this level requires. So Hamas did it on their own. Hezbollah in Iran, they don't want this. Remember, Hezbollah is a political party. Lebanon is a nation recovering from a tremendous political and economic crisis. Hezbollah is a political party that's dedicated to helping Lebanon rise up from the ashes. They are politically committed to good governance in Lebanon. The last thing they want is a war with Israel. That would destroy everything because Israel once again bombed Lebanon. Iran, for generations now, has been under American sanctions, strangling sanctions. For the first time in a long time, Iran has the prospects of peaceful coexistence. China just brokered a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. They're no longer enemies. They're working together. Iran joined BRICS. Iran joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Iran is standing up and taking its own position in the world as an economic power. The last thing they need is a war. So Iran and Hezbollah do not want this escalation, but there is a danger because Israel is so insecure that Israel may very well lash out against Hezbollah in a way that causes this problem to explode. So Hassan Nasrallah, in his speech, has said his job is escalation management.
Yeah, right. Escalation management. Because, and I think you've spoken about this in other interviews, it seems like the BRICS nations are winning the long game anyway. They're going to win the de-dollarization game because so many nations, because the U.S. has weaponized the dollar, especially with cutting off Russia from the SWIFT system and then printing money and using money to send weapons to Ukraine and now to Israel. Seems like the BRICS nations know that if they can just hold out another year or two, the dollar loses so much value that the Western nations are unable to meaningfully print enough value or even to keep up with munitions production that would be necessary to fight a war with the U.S. sending weapons to Israel. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, no, I mean it's a sound assessment. Let's put it this way also to add to that. Again, because Israel has gone in heavy-handed into Gaza, no one is speaking out in support of Israel besides the United States and a handful of European countries. The entire world has spoken out against Israel. The collective South, the BRICS nations, the developing nations, the G20 nations have spoken out. This accelerates the economic demise of the United States because we are linked to Israel. Israel is being further isolated. We are being isolated with them. We are becoming weaker every day we support Israel. Now, I'm not saying that we abandon Israel. There are many people out there who believe that we should be Israel's friend. But, you guys all know this. You go to a bar on Friday night and you got a really good friend out there, but he's drunk. Friends don't let friends drive drunk. You have to, if he gets in the car, turns on the engine, you have to reach in there and turn the keys off, take the keys away and say, no, you don't get to behave in a suicidal manner. If you're the friends of Israel, we have an obligation to do what's good for our friend and for us. We don't let friends drive drunk. Right now, Israel is a nation drunk on arrogance, drunk on revenge. We have to get the keys out of that ignition.
Are you saying we should cut off funding to Israel?
Well, first I'd start off by telling Israel that the United States can't support policy X, Y, and Z. And if Israel refuses, then I would tell them, then you won't get weapons A, B, and C. We have to start leveraging what we can. Israel has taken America for granted too long. They've controlled Congress too long. Their policies have not been questioned by Americans for too long. It's time that we start holding Israel accountable as being a separate sovereign state. They are not an extension of the United States.
Blinken has no credibility in the Middle East. Everywhere Blinken goes, they disrespect him. I mean, America has lost its geopolitical weight in the region, it seems to me. Your thoughts?
You're correct, but we could regain it simply by telling Israel that we provided you 2,000-pound JDAM bombs to protect yourself against Hezbollah and Iran. If you drop another 2,000-pound JDAM bomb on Gaza, we will demand all the weapons that we've given you to be returned, and if you don't return them, you'll never see another weapon again. Not only that, we'll force AIPAC to register as foreign agents. We'll start treating you as a hostile nation. However you want to play this, Israel, because I would remind the Israelis, you don't own us. Benjamin Netanyahu brags about how he owns the U.S. Congress. And indeed, when the current Speaker of the House, the first thing he didn't come out and say, I'm going to help the homeless, I'm going to help this, I'm going to help that, I'm going to help America.
No,
the first thing
he said he's going to help
said,
Israel.
I'm going to get money for Israel. What the heck is wrong with that picture? If you're an American, that should disgust you. And it disgusts me. We have to tell the Israelis that while we're your friends, you are not of us. You are not one of us. You're not the 51st state. We are not the same. And our national security.
We got to cut it off there.
Trump yours. Yeah.
We got to wrap it up there, Scott. I apologize, but the website for Scott Ritter, folks, is scottritterextra.com. Scott, I want to thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts with us today. It's been a really intriguing conversation.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you don't get in too much trouble.
Well, you as well, probably, but we'll see. But thank you for joining us today here on the Alex Jones Show, the free speech platform. I'm Mike Adams. I enjoyed hosting today, and stay tuned for more straight ahead. Thank you for supporting us here at Brighteon.com. And one way you can also help support us is by shopping at healthrangerstore.com. And we've got some really exciting new products to share with you here today. I've got samples on my desk, and there's three things to mention here. The one on the left, it's called Hydrate Elementals. It's a combination of coconut water powder, certified organic, and Aquaman, which is a mineral supplement that has some very special, unique properties. This is about mineral replenishment and hydration. You can learn more about it at our website, healthrangerstore.com. It's very popular, especially with people who do any kind of fitness or workouts. We've also got here on the right side a new trail mix product. This has coconut chips and nuts and almonds and walnuts plus raisins. It's a very delicious trail mix, and it's not just a bunch of junk and a bunch of crumbs and byproducts of nut processing. I mean, this is a high-end trail mix, all certified organic, all lab tested, including for glyphosate and heavy metals and more. Check it out at healthrangerstore.com. You're really going to enjoy this. And then finally, in the middle there, we have something brand new that I'm super excited about. It's a pine needle nasal spray, and that's in the green little small vials there with the nasal spray aerosolized tip on the top. I personally harvested the pine needles for this in Texas. They're loblolly pine trees because the pine needles are extremely high in shikimic acid. And then I oversaw the extraction of the shikimic acid and then the mixing of that into this formula. You can read the ingredients on our website. But this product is not being sold. It's only available for free as a bonus giveaway during our Black Friday sale event that's coming up. And watch for that. Join our email list. You'll get the announcements. You get all the links to participate in that. The only way that you can get that nasal spray with the shikimic acid using pine needles that I personally harvested in Texas is through the Black Friday event at healthrangerstore.com. And during that event, by the way, it's our biggest sale of the year. We're going to have the most products on discount, all kinds of amazing discounts, including on third-party products that are drop shipped and so on. Wait till you see the catalog and the landing page for that. It's going to be quite impressive. But you definitely want to take advantage of that and get some of this pine needle nasal spray, and look up shikimic acid too, because that's the molecule that is used to make Tamiflu, by the way. Very interesting fact. Also, one more thing, on our website, healthrangerstore.com, we now have available certified organic heavy cream powder. We've got it in pouches and number 10 cans. And this heavy cream powder is, of course, laboratory verified. It's tested for heavy metals and glyphosate and microbiology as well. And there's no junk in here. It's literally powdered heavy cream. It's not just maltodextrin and a bunch of garbage with cream flavor. None of that stuff. This is the real deal. That's why it's not cheap, by the way. But if you want to add to your food storage pantry heavy cream, this goes a long way. And we also have, by the way, we have now organic white cheddar cheese powder, also in number 10 cans and pouches as well. So you can make your own macaroni and cheese pretty easily by combining this cheese powder with the organic cream powder and some salt and pepper and some onion powder, and get yourself some, organic macaroni, and it's all done. You have a really nice meal. So take advantage of this at healthrangerstore.com, and that will also help support this platform. We thank you for your support, and I'm committed to bringing you more interviews, more content, more analysis each and every day that helps you understand what's happening in our world, helps you navigate it, and also, importantly, helps you survive it. Thank you for supporting us here at Brighteon.com and healthrangerstore.com. Take care. A global reset is coming, and that's why I've recorded a new 9-hour audiobook. It's called The Global Reset Survival Guide. You can download it for free by subscribing to the naturalnews.com email newsletter, which is also free. I'll describe how the monetary system fails. I also cover emergency medicine and first aid and what to buy to help you avoid infections. So download this guide. It's free. It's my gift to you simply because I want like-minded people to survive.